How's it going, Andrew?
What's going on, Matt?
Not much, not much. Just still plugging away at yard work, although the majority of it's done now. Now it's just wood chipper and planting.
Yeah, you're in trouble because you invited me to help you with your plant ideas, which this is what I'm going to warn you about. I get really excited about it, but as you start to get into gardening, you're going to diverge from my vision and just let it happen. When you start to see yourself going there, just don't. I'm not going to be offended. Every gardener has their own. It's like a painter, right? You're going to have your own vision in your head, and I can lead you to the start, and then you're going to diverge, and just then at that point be like, Andrew, I got it from here. And I'll say, hell yeah, have at her.
Well, it's not like this is my first play at gardening. This is just my first play at doing like native, pollinator friendly, and actually paying attention to when stuff blooms and stuff. I mean, I did for a good long time throughout high school and college work at Stein's Gardens and Gifts. So it's
That's
not
true.
like I'm unfamiliar with a lot of this stuff. And my mom and dad always had like a bunch of plants and stuff. This is just a different realm of gardening that I've entered before. So
Yeah, it's actually what I find really fun about the native plant game is not only is it just beneficial for the environment, but at the same time, you have to be a little more creative because you're not just putting plants in, you're trying to find plants that play well together. And so you're trying to
right,
have you're kind of playing God. You're like, I'm going to make my own little ecosystem and try to find the pieces that it needs to kind of self-regulate and be a little happy ecosystem. And then it becomes an obsession. And yeah, it's fun.
what I'm really excited for is next year when we underplant all the pine trees out back. That'll be fun to try to figure out once I get rid of the invasives, including buckthorn that had been growing underneath them. So got to clear those buggers out first.
So, like, what we're going to do next year is there's a park nearby to your house, a very big park with like a lake in it, it looks
Oh
like.
yeah, Lowell.
That's where we're going to go. We're going to walk around there and take a peek. But the challenging thing is the underplants under pine trees are oftentimes different than standard forest underplanting because the pine needles are so acidic and it's
Right.
heavier shade. So like that's how like I've been enjoying the native planting is finding an ecosystem similar to what I'm trying to plant and just walking around and using the Seek app to figure out what the plants are, see who they grow next to, and kind of start mapping the idea from there. And that's how you get really wonky with it.
I do love that Seek app. If any listener hasn't used it yet, SEEK, it'll identify animals, plants, and insects for you through the camera on your phone.
And what's cool is it links to the iNaturalist app, which allows you to record your data. And so if you spot a plant, you can send it over to iNaturalist and say, hey, on this location, this was here. Then it goes to peer review. So other iNaturalists will either confirm it, make an update, or they'll it has to be like crowd double checked. So if it's just like, hey, he's newer, he kind of misidentified, someone else might come in and say, hey, no, this actually looks like this. And so then you help build out the data set for where these plants are distributed or animals or bugs. So that's kind of fun too. You can be like a little fake scientist.
Nice, right on. Well, we probably shouldn't leave our guests sitting around too long. So why don't you hit that intro music and then we'll introduce them.
Sounds good.
Loosen up your ties and roll up your sleeves. It's time for fellowship with Matt and Andrew. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin or any other Grand Lodge or any appended body.
All right. You know, it's funny. Right when the music was playing, I was like, did I click the record button? Good news, I did.
That is good news. Man, you would have made me very sad had you not, because that was a very good conversation to open the podcast. All right. Well, with us today, we have brother Bryan Morearty, who is from West Allis Lodge, and I believe is a plural at least James Hayes as well, but I will let him talk about all of that and how long he's been a Mason and everything else. So thanks for coming on today, Bryan.
Pleasure to be here, guys.
So, Bryan, for just our listeners, can you give us a quick rundown of your Masonic titles and what got you into Masonry and what keeps you in Masonry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I joined Masonry. Technically, I got my EA, Entered Apprentice degree in August of 2023. I was raised a Master Mason in January of 2024 and I have been plugging along ever since. Like I said, I am from West Allis Lodge and I pluraled in a couple others. Just joined the Scottish Rite a couple months ago. What got me interested and involved in general was looking for a sense of community, like-minded individuals, sense of structure that you don't really get too often these days. I'm a younger guy, so there's not really too many really accessible places in today's society for people to really communicate. I'm especially coming out of, the time period where I kind of yearn for that structure that you got in school where you're crammed in a room with a bunch of other people, so you're forced to get along with them because you're used to being in a room for years on end with these people. Gone are those days. You got your workplace and your home, and that's about it. So you really have to look out, be on the lookout for finding these people who might share your interests. It's very tough to find that right fit, and I found that in Masonry.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting way to look at it. I mean, yeah, you do get put in these like little silos. It can be hard to like really get a diverse breadth of people to like meet and learn about and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. And a bigger part of it too, just besides the whole social aspect of it, was the sense of continuing education and finding somewhere where you got a rabbit hole to dig in if you so choose. And there's, to put it, in the perspective of IGN, there's a little something for everyone. One of the things that I found as I, was raised was that there is a lot of topics, historical topics, that you could really dig into the meat and potatoes of if you were inclined to dig into English history or the European in general or the American history for American listeners in particular. There is such a bevy of subjects that you could really research for the rest of your life and still find stuff in the past and present to look into and kind of look through the lens of, your Masonic education kind of from a holistic perspective.
Well, yeah, and even outside of the English and the Anglo-American history, it being a worldwide fraternity, you can really pull that thread a pretty long way and see what's going on in India and in all these different places. What has fascinated you the most that you've researched on Masonry? Like you're talking about the history, what has really drawn you in that you've really found enlightening?
For me, it's the connections. I'm really big into my personal family history, and I'm one of those guys who doesn't have like a single tie to a single country. I come from a family that is Irish on one side and Polish and German on the other. So there's a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of strings that you can pull at if you were looking to dig into what were people doing 300-400 years ago that made it come out the way it did. For me, just recently, actually, this is a great segue. I was researching another rite, a Swedish rite, up in, as you can probably guess, Sweden and Scandinavia, that angle. And you kind of build this real quick web of ideas where once you start researching one thing, you start researching like 5 other things. And then once you start researching 5 things, you're going into 20 other different directions. That is something that kind of was in the back of my head even when I was raised, was looking back into the, I wouldn't call it antiquity, but 500 years ago, what were people in Europe doing that precipitated not only Masonic history, but just history in general? Looking through the common thread of how our country came to be, it's through the context of what was. And you can see that DNA in our practices here in Wisconsin, here in America, and elsewhere. You can see those 100-year-old footprints. So I think that that's a big part of it for me, what kind of interested me right from the get-go. And I knew that walking in, I'd want to learn more about the history and how that kind of intertwines with the geography of the world as it is.
I mean, what's interesting, too, is I always like to say Masonry is like the like the Mississippi River. There's tons and tons of rivers that flow into it, and it kind of has its own identity. But like you're talking about that web of constant pulling, like when you go back into the the foundations of Masonry into the 1700s, that's where the web is the most complex, where like there's so many different ideas and groups and things, and then various lodges, and they're not all aligned on what Masonry is going to become. So there's so many differing rites and differing opinions and differing rituals, and it's this chaotic hodgepodge of ideas that slowly start to get standardized until you start to see what is closer to modern Freemasonry. But it's crazy when you start to think, it's like, oh, this was handed down in this exact little box. And you're like, well, actually, it's a little more complicated how it got into this box. Because like you said, there's so many of these different threads that are all kind of forming in until it started to get a little more bureaucratic and a little bit more organized into larger bodies that kind of created what we see today.
Absolutely. And it's actually, if you're looking at it from, you want to observe some of the finer points of history, some of the older stuff, that gets you into a real mess of subjects where you can find 1,000 different ways of doing some of the most mundane things imaginable in the ritual. In some of these lodges, especially here in the States, we kind of take, I think, for granted that we're living in a time where there is an incredible amount of standardization and peculiarity. We're very peculiar about things. We're very orderly and structured. It wasn't always the case. A lodge, we say is a 20-minute drive 100 years ago was a much further distance. And you see that in practices being very different. If you look at old monitors, for example, you can see very quickly that distances create massive gulfs in how the practice was actually carried out, especially in Europe. Like I mentioned, America, we're kind of blessed in a sense that we kind of have a good idea what we're getting into. If we were to step outside our comfort zone, even if we were out of state, for example, in a different part of the country, we've got a general idea of what's going to go on and how it's going to go.
Right. And to your point about peculiarities, it's actually kind of interesting that some of that is still going on today. There are several jurisdictions that still don't use a cipher, and everything is taught mouth to ear. So from what I understand, in those jurisdictions, you could see a Master Mason degree in one lodge and hear the lecture and get all points A, B, and C, and D of the lecture, and then go to another lodge and hear a completely different lecture, but still get points A, B, C, and D, which I've always found fascinating. It makes me really want to travel into some of those jurisdictions.
Absolutely. And not to sound too fancy, but like if you look at it from a sociological lens of, they're going to have totally different ways to convey perhaps the exact same information and the exact same ideas to you. The symbolism might be slightly different even, but at the end of the day, you're being treated to the same intentions, the same meanings, and that has a deeper purpose beyond just raw memorization.
Yeah, it's like, even though I like to think that the differences between jurisdictions is kind of what creates the special part of travel, is that if you're a recognized jurisdiction by a Grand Lodge, you're in agreement that we're basically teaching the same stuff, but the methods might slightly change. And the further you go out of the U.S. and different countries, the more different it might be. But the messaging is still kind of the same. And so that's what, I think what makes it fun, because if it was completely perfectly standardized worldwide, I think you would lose some of the fun part of traveling, which is seeing how it's done a little differently.
I totally agree.
So who would you say 100%. Who would you say your favorite, what is a historical Masonic figure that you think that you admire the most? Who's your Masonic hero from the past?
Oh, gosh. I don't know if I could necessarily call him the end-all be-all, but I just wrote a paper on Nathan Hale, of all people, and he died very young. To give context to the listeners, he died in his early 20s, and he's a great example. I don't want to, just pick a random figure from early American history. There's handfuls, dozens of those guys, but I do want to, single out Nathan Hale in particular because of his age, specifically because he's representative of one of the greatest virtues of all life, Masonic or otherwise, which is sacrifice. Nathan Hale, to give context to the listeners, he was called upon to the United States at the time, very early on in its history, to effectively serve as an informant, a spy, on behalf of the United States. And he paid the ultimate price, to keep it short and sweet and to the point. And because of that, he symbolizes someone who had a lot ahead of him if he were so inclined to take it, but he still couldn't ignore that call to duty and to serve the country in some capacity, and he did. And I think that speaks to something that can resonate with everyone, that sacrifice is something that should not be ignored. It is a virtue that should be valued in any life, and I really couldn't say necessarily that lesson is unique to him, but it is something that is unique in his case because of his age. You see people all these days taking things safe, taking it very safe, very risk averse, non-confrontational, even in conversation with friends and family. It's all digital. It's all something that's very removed. You're communicating with your phone, by text or by call. It really removes a lot of the pain from having negative interactions. So having someone so young be so willing to take on such a tremendous risk is something you just do not see that often at all today. So I think that is something I could appreciate.
That's an excellent answer, Bryan. I have kind of a curious, funny that I say that, question for you. So you're obviously, I'm going to say, a curious person by nature, which may defeat the purpose of my question. But were you always just naturally this curious, or was there something about Freemasonry that sparked you to like seek out all this kind of stuff? Was there something there that made you be more curious about stuff, or is that just kind of been the way you've always been?
I think I've always been naturally curious, but it's what you surround yourself and who you surround yourself with that kind of enable you to pursue what, your natural tendencies. So I think that the certain people that I've met on my Masonic journey have definitely empowered me to kind of know what I want better when it comes to seeking out Masonic history or just history in general, frankly. I have a lot of good people that I surround myself with, good mentors, and the Masonic lodges in my area have provided that to me. And it's something that I think is incredibly empowering because having the right people in your life, in your circles, is like what you refer to in the tech industry. It's a 10x. It really elevates your ability to use your time and, the time you have on Earth effectively and efficiently for that matter. So I would say, to bring it full circle, yeah, I mean, I love learning more, but I've definitely found a lot of good people in the past couple years that have helped me nudge myself in the right direction when I need it, and that is a really big empowerment.
Sweet.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. I'm also a fairly curious person. I think that Masonry does give you, like you said, a lot of things to put your brain into. Like it has a lot of very interesting historical and philosophical elements that you can waste an entire life, and I don't mean waste lightly, I mean it in a good way, just pulling the threads down various little avenues to find all these nuggets of wisdom or cultural curiosity, or historical for that matter, that it's like you can truly like really put your curiosity into a really fun spot because it opens the avenues to so many different topics, studies, and various things. So, I mean, I get it, Bryan. I feel that.
Oh yeah, if you like digging, a fraternity lets you dig, that's for sure.
Quarrying. We call it quarrying. Bryan, what would you say was something that totally surprised you when you joined the craft? Something that you weren't expecting to find?
Wasn't expecting to find. Oh gosh. I, like many, kind of got a lot of exposure to the craft through media, through, movies and shows, and just kind of over time you kind of get these experiences of like someone who goes off to lodge every once in a while, and it's kind of mentioned in passing in most of the references. So you get this idea, this image of it being a bunch of stuffy old guys in a room that, sure, they'll teach you some lessons, but, it's just a hodgepodge of old guys. In my experience, well, there's definitely some old guys, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of young guys, like I mentioned, I'm a younger guy myself. I was fully expecting to be the youngest guy in the room practically everywhere I went, and I have been pleasantly surprised. There's a brother from upstate Wisconsin here that I've really connected with very early on, and he's just an example. There's many others who I've engaged with that are at or around my age or even younger, and they've really challenged that preconceived notion I had that I'm just going to be totally outnumbered by guys who I might not have any real cultural connection to. When you meet someone double or triple your age, you're going to find it harder and harder to really connect with them on things. They may just not be aware of the zeitgeist, the hip new things. So it's really nice and reassuring when you're around people your same age and you can actually have that diverse crowd. So I would say that is something that I can't say shocked. I don't think that's the right word for me, but definitely broke what I had thought was going to happen walking into the fraternity, and it's for the best. It really is.
And kind of to your point, I do find, I have found that Freemasonry has been getting younger as a whole in Wisconsin. When I joined at 35, I was one of the youngest people in the room. And, over the past couple of years, that notion has kind of been broken down now. Well, yeah, Andrew
And
came
then I
along.
came walking in to set the record even lower,
Right.
dude.
Well, not really, because I went through the same time as Ryan Teely, and he was 18 at the time. So
He gets an asterisk. That's familial connection. That's an asterisk.
But I have noticed that the sidelines and officer chairs are starting to get filled with more younger men, and I really like it. And I think something that Freemasonry offers that a lot of other organizations don't is you do get a wide range of age groups, which to a certain extent, you can get along with all the brothers because we all have a common connection through the degrees we went through. But the brothers that are like kind of in the middle of the age groups, like myself now at 42, I kind of enjoy the pleasure of being able to bridge the gap between some of the younger guys and the older guys, and it can kind of walk in both worlds there, right? Like I have enough exposure to what the older guys are about and enough exposure to what the younger guys are about that I can kind of assist in bringing them together sometimes.
You're an old walker.
Yeah, I'm a day walker.
Yeah, I think it's nice when I think the crafts ecosystem is at its best when there's a decent representation from the generations, from the youngest one being 18, 19, 20s up through the senior generation. I think when there's a good mix, that's when you see a really healthy lodge where you get a mix between energy and wisdom would be what I like to say, like new ideas, but also the wisdom to know how to temper them or to guide them or to support them. I think that's where you really hit that sweet spot.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely. I think too, having younger folk come in, it really helps secure the ability for us to get accustomed to the culture of that generation as it develops, and introduce them and have it not be so much a shock for those who are already in the lodge to understand, times are changing in more ways than one, really.
Well, and to assist them with it's so nice to be in a room where there's, I've had to rely on older members for various advice as I've kind of become a homeowner and a dad where they have that experience and they can answer those types of questions. But then in the reverse, when there's various tech things or stuff that's kind of, more at the cutting edge that they would have been a little bit not during their prime time to know how to do that stuff, that you can relay the information back to kind of, where they need a little extra information, you can give it. Where you need some help, they can give it from their experience. And so it becomes a win-win.
Hey, well, you got one thing going for you. You can open an email. So you got that going for you.
I've taught them to download PDFs and download apps.
Yeah.
And download my podcast.
The most important thing.
Definitely the most important thing. So, Bryan, you're a member of a couple of different lodges, and I know you got there because you quickly became a well-traveled Mason, and people all over the district know you because you have been out there so much traveling. What inspired you to start traveling?
Thank you. What I really do enjoy, what inspired me to start traveling Masonically in particular, I think does start from an earlier thread of just loving to travel in general. I've been abroad a couple of times. I've been all the way around the state and the states. So I think that kind of bled into my experience Masonically. Exposure to new ideas and people is a big part of it, a big part of the equation to me. So that is what kind of drew me towards it. What kept me invested in visiting and seeing fresh new things around the state as much as I can is that there's a lot of great people that you just don't see on an ordinary basis if you're sticking to your own little corner. We're really blessed here in the biggest city in the whole state, frankly, we can throw a stone and, maybe slingshot it and we'll hit another lodge. It's not the case everywhere else. And I know it's not the case in many other places in the whole country. That's for sure. So I think that exposing yourself to opportunities to meet these other guys, new guys, or people you really just enjoy being around is a big part of it. Because frankly, I mean, it's nice to see a cool looking room, but I could care less about the room so much as the people that are in it. And that is a big part of why I go around, is to see those people.
Right on. I would agree with that. Having traveled a bit myself, yeah, getting to know the people and drawing inspiration from what other lodges are doing, whether that be good or bad, drawing inspiration that you don't want to do it that way, or drawing inspiration that you do want to do it that way, is very valuable, and I think can really help your development as a Mason and as a leader, honestly.
Absolutely. And that leads to another important thing I would like to impart to the audience is, if you're very early in on your journey, or at any point for that matter, travel, see some sights and learn what you can. Because Matt's touching on a really important point, is that there's two sides to this coin. You can learn a lot about what you want to see happen, but you can also learn a lot about what you want to avoid. It's sort of like the classic, watch other people's mistakes, learn from them. Don't make your own mistakes and learn from them. Learn from others.
It certainly quickens the process sometimes.
Absolutely.
Right? And so your travels obviously led you to a very interesting point, especially being as new of a Mason as you are, to have come up with this really cool idea for the state. And I would just like to preface this for our listeners that are out of state. So a couple of districts in our state do things like the Traveling Apron or the Traveling Lodge Award, which is if you visit every district or every lodge in your district in a 365-day period on your own, you are eligible for the Traveling Apron Award. And if you as a lodge, which is one primary and two other guys, visit all the lodges in your district in a 365-day period, you are eligible for the Traveling Lodge Award. But it had always been contained to the districts until Brother Bryan came along with a excellent idea, and I will let you talk a little bit about that, Bryan.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Essentially, to piggyback off what Matt was saying, it's sort of just an enlargement of the district idea, but applied to a whole state or a whole jurisdiction. So in Wisconsin, this new program, the Wisconsin State Masonic Passport, you have to visit lodges from each of the districts. There's no time limit, nothing like that, but it encourages you to go to places that you might not otherwise go. As we were talking about a little bit ago, how we're, really blessed down here in the big city. 9 times out of 10, you'll go to a lodge that is about maybe 10 miles or less than you, easily. But many of the states in the country are pretty darn big. And to keep yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone and encourage you to see some new sights, I kind of threw an idea out at the Grand Lodge about a year ago, suggesting, hey, there's some really successful programs out there. I see that, yep. And why don't we do that statewide? And that's the gist of it. It really was just a nudge at them saying, here, I prepared some ideas for you. You do what you want to do. And they kind of tweaked it a bit. They made it, the Grand Lodge tweaked it a little and kind of adjusted things, and that's okay. That's a good thing. And by the end of the whole, when everything was said and done, the dust settled, we had a new passport. And we actually, here in Wisconsin, it was implemented earlier this year, I want to say around March time, thereabouts. We already had a brother who completed it by the time of our annual communication in June. So I want to mention that because it takes a lot of time and effort to really throw, we have 12 different districts. Some states may have less, some states may have more, but that means you're committing 12 meetings out of your life, which isn't a lot in a whole lifetime, but in 3 months, going outside your home district to go see someone else, maybe 20-minute drive one way or the other. But a lot of those districts aren't 20-minute drives. So I do want to just praise, his name was Michael Thumb. You can cut that if you don't need that. And
I'm not gonna
he was nothing. Really... Oh, what's that?
I'm not going to cut nothing.
All right, perfect. Good. Congrats to you, Michael. That was just I wanted to meet him at annual communication after he got that presentation. It's just so cool that he could complete it that quickly. He wasn't too old a guy, you know. I think in the back of my head I was thinking it's going to be guys who are retired looking for something to do, which no problem there, but he wasn't all that old, frankly. So, very cool, Michael. Very cool.
He just got after it.
Yeah, exactly. So that is kind of how its genesis and how it came to be. I'm just really, frankly, happy I had a hand in it, to put it lightly. I was kind of expecting it to already have happened, and then I realized it's not a thing. Let's just do it.
I always thought it was a great idea.
Right.
I love it all along.
No, it's an excellent idea, and I do think it's really great that we have it going on. I mean, I'm going to, by the end of July, outside of my home district, have visited 3 other districts now. So
Nice.
I'm starting to work on it. You know, some of those are going to be a little more challenging, way up in northeastern Wisconsin when you're looking at a 4 or 5 hour drive, but that makes for good podcast content, right, Andrew?
Yeah, right. If we have to go up to Duluth, we'll be on a 7 to 8 hour drive. Can get a whole year's worth of episodes.
Right.
Do you guys want to get controversial?
Oh boy, where are you going?
Do we want to cause problems? I do. Bryan, do you think that modern Freemasonry is living up to its potential? Why or why not?
No, and here's why. Modern Freemasonry, I think, is deeply rooted in its history and tradition, and many people, I feel, whether it's intentional or not, weaponize the adherence to tradition as an opportunity to maintain things as they were and have been and as they always should be, rather than adapting to the times. Adapting to the times, when I say that, doesn't mean change everything. What it means is enhance everything based on what's new, fresh, and better. We're not, reinventing anything per se. What we are is adding on some of the best things that we can, and that's the ideal. So to put it bluntly, absolutely not is it living up to the best it could be. And it's not from this deep philosophical, it's not perfect and it'll never be perfect. That I feel ignores the fact that there's plenty of jurisdictions that have not caught on to many modern trends that really could get the right people in the right place at the right time to get involved and make themselves better. And at the end of the day, that's a big part, if not our entire identity at its core, is helping good people be better, helping good men be better men. So I would say a way to combat that and a way to help brothers who want to not only be better men, but also build a fraternity that's better than it is and see that future that is there, is to engage in constructive dialogue. More and more frequently, we've seen, especially in the environment in the United States here, an unwillingness, and I touched on this actually earlier, an unwillingness to discuss and debate. It can always be perceived as political in nature or divisive, and there is a time and place where things aren't or shouldn't be discussed, but I think that is a shield that protects too many discussions from taking place. And that's a big part of it to me.
I would wholeheartedly agree with you. And I do find it interesting and kind of contradictory at times that we are part of a fraternity that, is dedicated to making good men better, yet we fail horribly sometimes at making our own lodges and our own fraternity better.
And on top of that, what I find frustrating too is like you mentioned, the cult or tradition. We always go, but no, that's the way we always did it. And like you were mentioning earlier, when you actually study the history of Freemasonry, they changed a lot. Like, it wasn't a stagnant start where they did something once and they never improved or changed or adapted. There were a handful of big changes that happened throughout the history of Masonry. And what makes me mad too is when we want to make a very important change that sometimes is actually going back to an older tradition, we still get beat by, going back to tradition. And you go, no, I'm talking about the tradition that's older than that tradition. And then they're like, well, no, but this is what we're doing now, so we should just keep doing that because tradition, which can also hamper it.
The mental gymnastics, the gears turning in their brain as they're confronted with their own argument.
Right. Right. Well, and I mean, if we don't look forward, things will never improve. And Andrew, you and I talked about this on a recent episode, like within the last 2, about how we wish 30 years ago they would have thought to set up a capital improvements fund for the lodge, right? But now to make the lodge better for the future, we're looking at doing it now because it wasn't done 30 years ago, but we want it to be there for the Masons 30 years from now. And, that's become a discussion topic among the trustees by us, but, it's something to move the lodge better into the future, right? And we can't sit there and go, well, the guys 30 years ago didn't do it, so we probably shouldn't do it either. We can recognize the mistake that was made and correct it, right? So I think that's where open discourse and civil discourse especially is important.
Absolutely. And I think that's the civil discourse part of it is honestly probably the biggest takeaway is that, avoiding these conflicts or discussions, however you want to phrase them, is honestly downright disrespectful from brother to brother, because you're essentially saying, I don't respect you enough to believe that we can have a real, genuine, civil conversation. I think that that is a pervasive mindset, not only here in the United States, but just in the world in general. And I don't really have any real solid, strong answers as to why that's happening or how to really truly challenge it at its core. But when it comes to being brothers in a room together, I think that having trust that, they're acting in not only their interest, but also in the best interest of the fraternity is a good step forward. Having that faith and trust that you want what's best for the group is important to have.
Well, and when you are recognizing that you're supposed to be good men who are supposed to be gentlemen, and you can't control your own emotions well enough to maintain a discussion, or they cannot maintain their emotions well enough to have a discussion, and you just agree not to do it, you're basically saying that their perspective is not worthy of your ears because there's nothing redeemable about it. But we're supposed to be brothers. And so you have to assume that, you may disagree, and we disagree on many things necessarily so, creates a diversity of perspectives, that having a challenging discussion shouldn't be something that brothers especially are afraid to have, as long as they can stay on the level and treat each other as brothers without flipping a switch and just going into, like ego attack, personal attack mode, which is, the problem that we see a lot. And, me and Matt talk a lot about how we need more civility. And, I was reading a bunch of the Gentlemen in the Room articles the other day, the past Grandmaster Dave, and a lot of that is talking about the same thing. It's like you should be able to maintain and regulate your emotions as a man, and you should be able to have discussions in a respectful, civil way. And, we're supposed to be a gentlemanly society. So it's something that we should practice. Like I like to say, the lodge is like a dojo. We should practice it there so we can bring it into the world.
Absolutely. And speaking on dojo, they just had the Nationals back in May. If you ever want to see some really good sumo wrestling, look there. Check out, gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but if you look up May Sumo Wrestling Tournament. And that happens every year, just so throwing it out there for anyone listening. If you like sumo or Japan in general, May's like the month.
I'm an old school judo player and a jiu-jitsu player, so I like watching big boys do judo, basically. That's basically big boy judo with less big boy no-gi judo.
What else you got for us, Andrew?
You got to pick a question, bud. Back to you, lad.
Oh, come on. I've asked a bunch. Let's see. Bryan, you're currently the steward at your lodge, right?
Junior
at West
deacon.
Allis? Oh, you're junior deacon now. Holy cow. And I was just at your lodge. I don't know how I missed that. I do remember that now. And you guys are a left-handed lodge, the lodge where I would never be willing to sit in for junior deacon because I'd go to the wrong door.
It's a little odd, isn't it? Yeah. I want to say we and one other, I was told by a worshipful master, we are one of 2 lodges in the state. And I asked, of course, well, what's the other lodge? Oh, I don't know. It's one of them somewhere.
That's awesome. What would you say your most valuable experience being in the officer line thus far has been?
Probably the ability to be consistent. And now, I've definitely always been someone who really kept good tabs on my calendar and, regulated my schedule very well. But in the context of a fraternity organization or club or something like that, I was never someone who really always guaranteed my time to a club or a fraternity or whatever. I was kind of I'll go if I have some free time, I won't, So me getting involved in the officer line really kind of from this very start as a steward gave me sort of more purpose in going to lodge regularly, routinely, practically every time. Of course, I won't go if I'm sick or something, but aside from that, my Friday, my first and third Friday is locked in. And I think that really helps you as you're starting your Masonic career, so to speak, or journey, I should say. Having that anchor in terms of your calendar really does help because it prepares you for knowing this is a lifelong journey. Whether or not you're attending lodge, being involved in the lessons that we impart is a lifelong journey, and it requires time to fully impart upon you. So having that consistency that I got very early on by being in an officer role and just involved in a good group of guys was something that had a good effect on me, a strong effect on me.
Excellent.
I thought of a hard question.
Oh boy.
So we talked about how modern Freemasonry is not living up to its potential, potentially. What do you think we can learn from tradition that we should learn to do better from the past?
I think kind of in line with what the earlier part of this discussion was about, how there have been changes, recognizing the fact that change is not an enemy is a big component, I think, towards making a better fraternity. Recognizing that we don't have to be always, in pursuit of change per se, but we have to believe that there is space for it and that it can serve a good. Having that faith is very important. You get some of the dangerous old guard mindset that we don't want change because it's inherently bad, that I think that some people genuinely do hold. And that serves, whether they intend it or not, it can be very poisonous to the organization to have the kind of a idea of what Freemasonry is, or any organization for that matter, kind of locked in your brain, saying this is how it was done back in this year or when I was worshipful master, and this is how it should be, frozen in time, and never more should things change. Being open to change in a general sense, even without the pursuit of it, is probably the single greatest positive effect that you could impart upon a lodge or a jurisdiction or anything for that matter inside the fraternity, because there is going to be growing realities, especially in this digital age. And why I say digital is because there is social media out there that is far different than what we were used to 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And especially as we get more and more digitized as a society, that we're going to have to confront, how does this affect our culture of our home lodge? How does this affect the culture of the fraternity? And what can we stand to gain from it? Because by shutting it out and essentially saying, nope, we're locked in time, this is the year that I served, or this is when I was around, so it's how it should be, this is how everyone's experience should be, is a detriment to everyone, past, present, and future. Doesn't recognize the realities in the past. And why I'm saying all this is because technological change isn't something new. It's happened in the past. And that's a big part of it is, as you said, Andrew, things have changed a lot in the fraternity over the past several hundred years. And they're going to continue. And you're always going to get this old versus new mindset of what should be and what will be is kind of scary and new. That's always been around. It's always going to be around. And you kind of have to combat that on a personal level internally, saying, what can I take away from new stuff that would be good for everyone involved?
Well, and
Just want to bust out a Grandpa Simpson quote right now. It used to be with it, but then what it was changed, and now what it is scary.
well, and
he's totally right. He's totally right.
Well, and like when I look at some of the past traditions, I look at a lot of the stuff that we changed during the anti-Masonic movement. The craft changed a lot. That wasn't even that long ago. That's probably, 2-3 lifetimes? If you live to 100, probably less. The craft in America changed quickly, dynamically, and they got rid of a lot of things that were long-standing Masonic traditions that I thought were the throwing the baby with the bathwater out type of situations, such as opening up for business in lower degrees, the alcohol policy, which I would, I have some pros and cons with, but there's a variety of others within that they did as a counter reaction to a group that no longer exists. And then when you look at some older traditions that you see even further back in various jurisdictions, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that I think you could bring into the fraternity and it would be considered a change, but it's kind of like a change backwards in some things where it's like a correction that is aligning us, because I like to view Masonry as the bridge between the past and the future where we're going. And you want the ecosystem to be well balanced where you're like, yes, you have lots of tradition, but you also need to be doing that tradition in a modern expression of it, right? And so finding that middle ground where the past and the future can, kiss would be synthesize is, I think, really the goal of a good Mason and a good lodge.
I couldn't agree more. I definitely think that for anyone listening, just to be abundantly clear, my position isn't just throw everything out. It's absolutely take what is already great and make it better. And how you do that is you find things over the years that add to an excellent experience. The framework is something that is going to be ever evolving, but there's a lot of cool stuff that you can take from hundreds of years ago and today. Totally.
Cool. I think that's a good lesson to leave our listeners to ponder with. We're hitting about an hour mark.
Agree.
That's a good length. Yeah, I think it's something that's where I'd want to end it, so that's something that we think about that I think all Masons in this era are wrestling with in their own way.
I would agree with that for sure.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, it's been a pleasure having you on. I'm happy that we finally had a history buff like myself on so we could nerd out a little bit about history and about Masonry. Matt secretly appreciates it. I can see it in his eyes.
I do. I enjoy listening to people that know more about me than stuff. So it's never a problem for me.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for having me on. I'm deeply appreciative. And I just want to say thank you to all the listeners who have listened to me ramble and try to corral me for about an hour's time now. So thank you very much.
It was a very good time, Bryan. We really do appreciate you giving us some of your time and coming on to chat with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen.
Cool. And to our listeners, be sure to check us out on social media and like and review our podcast. It goes a long way. You can check us out on Facebook, Twitter. Well, maybe not Twitter, X. No, not that. That's the same thing. Oh, my God. Twitch. Not Twitch.
Facebook,
I'm losing
TikTok,
it.
Instagram. And as always, you can email us at timeforfellowship@gmail.com.
And check us out on Discord. Take care.
Have a great day. Ooh.